2004, the warming hit the front pages. Scientists, they already admitted back in 2004 and swept all that under the carpet. They didn't know the dynamics of climate change, and thus Princeton University was charged with the task of coming up with something and coming up with something quick. Now when you talk about global warming, people get this question in their heads. They'll say, I don't believe in global warming, yet it's getting warmer every single year. So what they did was they threw out a word, and people began to chase and support the word with what's happening in the world. The conditions of global warming are absolutely 100% real. The earth is warming up. Radiation is building. Sickness is running rampant all over the earth. But why? You see, there are forces out there that mankind cannot comprehend. What have you noticed? A change in weather phenomena, a change in earthquake activity, a change with the other objects in space. That's why we send probes all over the place. For proof of something, yes, but to also monitor. We've got satellites and craft orbiting just about everything we can, because they serve as an early warning system of what will happen to Earth. See, if something is just indigenous to Earth, maybe mankind can change it. But what we're having is not indigenous to Earth. It is not just for Earth. The entire solar system is beginning to do a wicked shimmy. And solar activity is a telltale sign of the exotic energy that's coming into the solar system.
Ever since 2020, the world has irrevocably changed. With every month passing, seeming to get stranger and stranger. It's scary to think what the future holds as we march forward together, facing a certain inevitability, a prophetic time that can only be described as biblical.
There was an ancient world.
The fall of man.
That's why God sent the flood.
There was a judgment that happened.
It changed the world profoundly.
There is yet a future judgment coming.
It'll be just as it was in the days of Noah. In the last days, the end time.
Do you want to know what the Presbyterian Church teaches or what the Bible teaches? Do you want to know what the Lutherans believe or what Jesus said? Do you want to do what the Baptists do or do you want to do what Jesus said? I wish, oh Lord knows, I wish we could put our religious upbringing to the side just for a moment and realize the only standard we have is the Word of God. It's not what your denomination teaches or believes, it's what thus saith the Lord. And I'm going to tell you, they have all been wrong in their interpretation of this scripture.
It is only wishful thinking that we are living in a safe, never perturbed solar system, and the safe, never perturbed earth.
I legitimately think we are one or two events away from living in the Stone Age again. And I think it could happen in our lifetime, and it could happen to you and I. Like, I'm really convinced that the fabric of society is way more fragile than anyone appreciates.
Yeah.
We've got a trifecta of items ready to be unleashed at this time: the Beaufort Gyre, the AMOC collapse, and a Heinrich event. For those who don't know, a record amount of cold, fresh water is in the Beaufort Gyre, and when it releases, it's going to be a big deal. Yale University called this the cold climate bomb just a few years ago as the record fresh water was accumulating, and as we learned just last year, it has stabilized its maximum accumulation, and it is ready to release. This is going to amplify the collapse of the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, which scientists believe could begin its demise in as little as 2 years from now. Now, while you can read any scientific paper on the AMOC collapse and find out how it's going to drive major cold, the Weather Channel said it best just a couple weeks ago. It's going to be similar to the scenario from the Ice Age movie, The Day After Tomorrow. But it actually gets worse, because the historical cold maker is happening right now as well. We are entering a Heinrich event. These occur when too much polar heat melts ice, and that contributes to the cooler, fresher ocean, but on a massive scale. One of the best modern studies complementing the mountain of historical studies is this one: more cold, more storms. That's what happens when you melt the polar region. There is already extra cloud cover albedo building due to the heating that has taken place, due to the extra evaporation. And when the tipping point in the oceans occurs from there being colder and fresher, creating colder winds and more easily producible sea ice in winter, things are going to swing the other way very quickly here on Earth. There is not evidence of all of these things happening at the same time in thousands of years, but the freshwater release, the melting ice, and the collapse of the circulation means that every ounce of warming we see is a lead foot on the gas pedal towards the next glacial and ice age condition. Not only is this evident in all of the observable data here on Earth, but we are due for it in the natural cycle. Heinrich events have been happening every 6,000 years. It's been 6,000 years since the last one, and the Earth is already starting to do it again.
For decades, those with eyes to see have been aware of chemtrails in our skies. And for decades, we were called conspiracy theorists. But in 2016, while serving as director of the CIA, John Brennan admitted that chemtrails are real at the Council on Foreign Relations.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly.
We found exactly the same elements listed in climate engineering patents. Same elements we found on countless surface tests of precipitation from all over the globe.
You want some figures? Okay, latest water test. Tested the rain. 13,100 micrograms per liter of aluminum in the rain in 2013. Normally, it should be 0. So 13,100 is pretty damn much, folks. It used to be 0, then it was 100s in the 2000s, and then since 2010, it's into the 1000s and the latest 13,100. In the snow on Mount Shasta, pristine Mount Shasta, 61,000 feet. No, excuse me, 8,000 foot level, 61,000 micrograms per liter. 4 times the amount that is found in the soil up there. Where in the hell is this stuff coming from if it's not coming from the soil? You know, these tests are international in scope. We're seeing this all over the world, guys. Okay, pH of acid soils is 20 times more alkaline. The aluminum in the soil has doubled in the last 10 years. Aluminum blocks essential nutrients. I am unable in my garden to restore normal pH, and that's because nanoparticles are now in the circulatory systems of both plants and humans. So welcome, fellow guinea pigs. The collapse and decrease of agriculture is something I worry about even more than the previous info about autism and Alzheimer's.
And we begin with what they are calling the largest volcanic eruption of the Holocene. Apparently, this submarine eruption about 7,000 years ago was a super eruption that occurred south of the mainland Japan area. Would have made the Tonga eruption from a couple years ago look like a sparkler. Up next, we've got an excellent paper on solar forcing of the hydrological cycle, with a bonus in how they recognize that much of the correlation is due to the sun's known effects on El Nino and the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. It is the sun's effect on these major oscillations that means that it impacts nearly everything weather-wise in the world. Folks, we just discussed the cold climate bomb in last night's video, and here today we've got a study suggesting that the freshwater content in the Beaufort Gyre has been underestimated. This means that the discussion of how bad it will be when it releases is just scratching the surface of its potential impact on the planet, filing that one under the bad news category. And last but not least, folks, we've got another micronova star. They're not only identifying more and more of these, but in this one, they were able to determine that only somewhere between 0.1% and 0.05% of the material dump needed to produce a classical nova is what's required for a micronova. It's another way of saying that triggering micronova events is way, way easier than classical nova events. It's in line with the astronomers' hypothesis that they are very common, just still hard to see. What does this mean? It means that everything we have said about material dumps causing stellar outbursts is true, that it's not just white dwarfs that can micronova, and that the video that has convinced more professors and NASA scientists to rethink our sun's potential is even more on point than any of us have realized. If you have not seen the background videos explaining every facet of this event, they are linked for you below, and you will literally get hundreds of facts in less than an hour. We have seen that this dust has been accumulating in the inner solar system. This is one of the best papers on how much more they are finding than has been expected. And of course, this morning, we got the first measurements from the outer solar system, something we didn't have before. No matter where they look, they are seeing more dust than expected, and this is what will eventually lead to the solar micronova shell that blasts away. To review, this all began in 1859, the year of the last super flare from the sun and when the Earth's magnetic pole shift began. the arrival of the galactic current sheet. It has been slowly progressing. Earth's atmosphere now has more than 50% more dust than it had a century ago, with only a tiny fraction of that being able to be blamed on increased winds at the Saharan desert. The shift is set to finalize with the geomagnetic excursion, minimum field intensity, and the solar micronova in the 2040s, in the next stage of Earth. Today's dust article confirmed the complete inundation of the solar system within the sheet, something we already knew from other evidence.
It's a glass, but in this sunlight, it's reflected red, green, like a rainbow. On the first prism on the moon, John. Something like that. 10 rock frags, a couple of which are, one of which is an interesting black glass along the sides of it. Another which is covered with black glass, and many little glass beads all over the place here, John. Oh, boy, that was one of those structures that's all included with glass. Yeah, so it's glass fractures there. I think the after on this will be pretty interesting. There's a rock with glass splatter all over the body. Hey, Tony, I just picked up one that is at bag 15 that has a black matrix, bluish black matrix with lamp-like either clast or fingerprint in it. And it's right behind the limb here. I don't know whether that's what we're looking for or not. Okay, that sounds good, Charlie. This seems to be one of the main reasons. In fact, all these missions talk about this. They talk about this glass splatter, these glass debris samples that pick up on the moon.
Imagine several years of 40% or more ozone depletion, with short-term solar storms taking us to near zero for days to weeks at a time. It is well known that for every 1% reduction in ozone, we will get enough UV to increase 1 to 3% in terms of melanoma and skin cancer. So a sustained 40% decrease with intermittent total loss scenarios is an absolute catastrophe for life on Earth, from humans down to microorganisms.
What determines the Earth's climate? Clearly the main thing that determines it is sunlight. Sunlight is what heats the Earth. Not all the light that arrives at the Earth from the sun goes to heating the Earth. Some of it is reflected back. It's just the part that is absorbed. And what happens is there's a certain rate at which sunlight is absorbed by the Earth's surface, and there's a certain rate at which the Earth's surface radiates to space. What comes from the sun is in the ordinary visible part of the spectrum that our eyes are sensitive to. What the Earth radiates into space is in the infrared part of the spectrum, longer waves than red, that our eyes are not sensitive to, but it's as legitimate, a form of light as the kind that we're used to. Now, if you calculate what the temperature of the Earth ought to be from how much sunlight is being absorbed, equaling how much infrared radiation would be radiated to space, you find that the Earth's temperature, by this simple calculation, is too low. It's about 30 centigrade degrees too low. The significant temperature changes on the Earth between ice ages and out of ice ages, glacial and interglacial time periods, seems to be connected with quite small changes in the amount of sunlight that reaches the Earth. I'd like to stress that the greenhouse effect makes life on Earth possible. If there were not a greenhouse effect, the temperature would, as I say, be 30 centigrade degrees or so colder, and that's well below the freezing point of water everywhere on the planet. The oceans would be solid after a while. Greenhouse effect is a good thing.
The suppression of uncomfortable ideas may be common in religion or in politics, but it is not the path to knowledge, and there's no place for it in the endeavor of science.
Happening to this planet, a magnetic pole shift. First up, the confirmation that as of the 2010 magnetic field updates, Earth's field has weakened 15%, meaning that by now, in 2024, we're likely down 25 to 30%. This is confirmed by their acknowledgement of what geophysicists and the European Swarm mission said, that the magnetic pole shift and weakening of the field is progressing 10 times faster than previously believed, and that the field is in fact undergoing a significant shift. I remember when the Swarm mission director said exactly this over a decade ago, that we are seeing the stages unfold of the next magnetic pole reversal of this planet. with the primary concern being the increased interaction between the solar wind and Earth's atmosphere and biosphere, our living world. There is acknowledgement that this is an unmitigated disaster at a global scale, worse than earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, hurricanes, pretty much every other natural phenomenon, with the lone exception being a planet-killing asteroid impact. During these magnetic events, the field drops by 90%. Down to only 10% of its normal strength. We've seen that several other places as well in the scientific research. This presents many risks to our planet, and they begin here with the normal technological risk from space weather events, moving on to how it can impact the atmosphere, infrastructure, and cause the death of many humans. One of the most important debates in this field, that these events can happen very quickly. Many scientists today are still trying to tell people that these events all take thousands of years, but that is not what the newest and most robust data is saying. We have evidence for several of these events that took place in less than 100 years. We're already more than 100 years into this one, which means that in theory, it could happen at any time. The field complexity and reversal process would get very messy, with not just an overall increase in space radiation exposure, but with areas having amplified exposure as the multipolar component of the field becomes prominent compared to the dipole component. I really like this next part, discussion of the severity of the 1859 and 1989 solar storms, how one took out power in only 90 seconds after the storm began, and how back then, Earth's magnetic protection was stronger than it is now, much more so in the 1859 event. The impact today would be disastrous. This graphic shows what the storm power of the 1859 event would have taken out in terms of the U.S. power grids, and again, with the magnetic field weakening now, the next one is going to be a lot worse than this, likely a total loss scenario, with impacts expanding to the GPS and radio signal communication networks. In their best imaginable case, a minimum of 130 million Americans would be without critical infrastructure for years to decades. This is just the latest in many publications saying that this would result in millions of American deaths. Worldwide, that number would be in the billions. And of course, that's the best case scenario. Then the focus comes to other infrastructure, starting with the food, production facilities, transportation, grocery stores, refrigeration, credit card processing, all fail in this scenario. And of course, there would be severe failures of the technology at the agricultural base level as well, at farms across the world. We're talking going back to handwork through and through. Billions would starve. No food, no water purification or distribution, no gasoline. But it gets even better. The cosmic radiation exposure would be massive, with solar particle destruction of ozone reaching severely dangerous levels. This would cause DNA mutations and severe UV exposure. Many important crops show vulnerability to increased ultraviolet rays, including stunted growth, lower yields, and damage to their cellular structures. Up next, they toss in the current magnetic protection of Earth in an excellent graphic, which not only shows the major weak spot in the South Atlantic, which is the point on Earth where the magnetic poles are currently moving away from, but they are set to meet in the Northeast Indian Ocean, which is why you see the two strongest points in red converging there on the other side of the world. The nation, and indeed the world, are not prepared. I speak with people in Congress, the military, and several key organizations, and I can tell you, nothing has changed since this paper came out. The climate stuff has all their attention, well, that and neo-pronouns, but the situation of the magnetic pole shift is largely being ignored, even while recent efforts have been made to amplify monitoring of space weather itself. But it's not enough. I fully understand their decision to not extend this work to the extinctions caused by these magnetic events. It would double or triple the length of the paper, even though one could easily imply such things from the evidence given. But don't forget, this is where we focus here at the channel, the evidence of extinctions with magnetic pole shifts. We've shown the key papers, interviewed the world's best expert on the topic. By the way, he told us we're in big trouble if you didn't see that one. If you are new to this information, I am literally begging you, look right below the video and find the Earth disaster video. This is huge. It's bigger than just the Earth, and you need to be aware of this situation as much as the cultural, political, and economic issues that we are facing now as well.
People are asking if you could clarify what the galactic current sheet is and how and why it's affecting us. Great question. Some people are hearing this stuff for the first time.
So, one of the key discoveries of the last several decades when it comes to space science was the idea that what we see in a laboratory and what they figured out mathematically on paper is actually what the sun has. When you have a magnetic ball spinning in space, sending out an electric field, the electric field won't just go out straight like this. It'll ripple and wave, just like a ballerina skirt. They call this the heliospheric current sheet. It's not terribly powerful from the sun, but we actually get hit with the sun's waving current sheet about every 7 days. And it turns out, we see this in the lab, we see this in the math, but we're also seeing it in the Milky Way. And we've started to discover it at other galaxies as well. And here's why this is important. The galactic current sheet contains two very, very critical components in addition to the fact that it's a waving field like this. So if you're anywhere near the plane of the galaxy, which we are, this wave is going to come and hit you sequentially time after time after time. It separates the north and the south magnetic fields of a system. One of the things we notice here on Earth and in the lab, specifically with the solar wind from the sun, when we get hit with the current sheet, the magnetic field of the solar wind all of a sudden flips to the other direction. And so from a galactic level, this is the galactic magnetic reversal. If anybody's ever heard, crossing the plane of the galaxy, no. The magnetic reversal point isn't at the plane. It's wherever that wave is. That's where the galactic magnetic reversal is. The other thing is it acts like a giant Swiffer duster in space. It sucks up dust, neutral gases, ions. And so when this thing hits, it delivers material and the galactic magnetic reversal. So why is this important? Well, in addition to the fact that we are seeing magnetic changes on every single planet, or atmospheric changes indicative of a magnetic change on every single planet in the solar system, we're seeing an increase in dust in interplanetary space between the planets, and we're seeing an increase in dust actually in the sun's atmosphere. Now, here's where it gets really important. When the actual magnetic reversal point hits the sun, what we see on the sun in terms of its luminosity and in terms of its solar wind outblasting is a combination of both its internal dynamics and its external dynamics, its interaction with the electric and magnetic fields in space. When that magnetic reversal of the galaxy actually gets to the sun, it's going to do two things. It's going to reduce that activity on the surface, which is going to dim the sun. And it's also going to reduce the outflow, which is going to cause that dust to accumulate in the atmosphere. This is how the sun turns red and then the sun turns black, because we've got it dimming and unable to push out. So that material is coming and actually causing even less light to escape. And then, of course, the magnetic reversal point passes. The sun is once again exposed to galactic electric fields. The sun kicks back up and it blasts off that dust shell as plasma, which ends up hitting the Earth as impactors, which ends up delivering that electric punch, which unlocks the crust from the mantle through that melting. And you know something interesting? You know the story of the four horsemen?
Yeah,
from the apocalypse?
Remind everybody.
The first one is white and wears a crown. The second one is red, steals the civility of the people. The third one is black, and there's several things related to that actually. But the fourth one is pale, and its name that's set on it was death, and hell follows with it. So, the sun is no longer yellow. The sun appears white in the sky, so bright at the top that it looks like it's wearing a crown, with the rays going in every which direction. When the galactic magnetic reversal point reaches, it will start to dim and look red. And the people's civility will surely be stolen from them when the sun turns red in the sky. As the dust accumulates and the sun turns black, everyone will know that judgment is upon us. And then when what we call the solar micronova happens and it blasts that material out into space, through the
once again see that pale yellow hue, but hell follows with it.
Man is about to get an eviction notice. They just don't know it. The earth is about to endure something, and this is not hopeful. This is not wishful thinking. This is not some tool of rhetoric, right? This is absolute. We're going to have a big problem with our magnetosphere. Just so that folks understand this, without the magnetosphere, we're going to be, many things will be set on fire. We're about to undergo a magnetosphere moment where our magnetosphere becomes quite chaotic. This is going to happen right before it totally goes away. So we'll have 10 days without a magnetosphere. Nothing facing the sun will survive. Not one soul better be caught outside.
Anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock is going to have a real bad day. Get it?
Earth is undergoing a cyclical magnetic pole shift, a geomagnetic excursion. This is an extinction event for many species every cycle, and we're going to go over the basics here for those new to the topic and exactly why it is such a scary thing for our planet. It has been well known that the magnetic field is weakening and the magnetic poles are shifting. These happen regularly on a cycle. That cycle is due again right now, and we are already seeing the exact signs. In the year 2000, NASA and geophysicists said we were down in the field by 10%, and the ESA's magnetic mission updated that number to 15% in 2010, and said that we had gone from losing 5% of our planet's field per century to 5% per decade. Let's see what that looks like visually, with the 2020 mark another 5% down, and the 2023 interpolated value when the latest acceleration occurred. The first 10% took 150 years to lose, the next 10% only 20 years. After the latest acceleration, we could be losing as much as 5% every 5 years. I plotted the most likely curve here, showing that around 2040 we will have the full flip, the excursion. And it may be a few years before or after that, but this is as accurate as it can be. The purple line you see there shows when we expect to be 50% down in the early 2030s, when it will be at a level that makes our technological way of life unsustainable, and when its impact on weather will be very extreme. Yesterday, we shared the critical new chapter out of a new university textbook, hitting the topic of space radiation and extinctions. And the two things it mentions are of critical importance for us over the coming years: the ozone loss due to particle-driven molecular destruction, and the extra exposure to cosmic ray space radiation. Basically, climate chaos and radiation exposure. This is because the only thing standing in the way of those effects is the magnetic field of Earth, the one that is weakening in this ongoing pole shift. To compare, here is a side-by-side of the normal and excursion or pole shift magnetic field. On the left, the strong field protection in bright colors in polar configuration. But on the right, we see the poles are actually near the equator, and the brighter colors are gone, leaving us more vulnerable to that dangerous space radiation. After 2 decades of scientific disagreement, the naysayers have now disappeared. Every major study on this topic in the last several years shows that these magnetic reversals, these pole shifts, are extreme events for the environment. They take a huge toll on the biosphere, and that is usually due to the extra radiation and ozone destruction-driven climate chaos. The best such paper directly tied those extinctions to past pole shifts in history, and they offer us a warning for the future. These, by the way, are the top scientists in the field in the world's #1 geophysics journal. Now, the aurora are beautiful, no doubt, but they have been offering us a warning lately, breaking records, appearing too often, and with less than expected solar activity. They're already having measurable effects on the ozone and on the environment as a whole. There are hundreds of studies confirming the ozone destruction by solar protons, solar electrons, and cosmic rays, all of which are penetrating into the atmosphere more with the weakening field and will reach critical levels in the years ahead. This extra radiation does two main things. Its ozone destruction allows more ultraviolet light into the Earth system, causing more heat, and the extra cosmic rays amplify the extremes of weather of all kinds: heat, cold, wind, lightning, storms, flooding, drought, basically taking Earth's weather and pushing it to the max in all directions. These things not only impact the climate, but living creatures. That extra ultraviolet light is dangerous for animals and plants, as well as the microbiota of the planet, including the plankton and chlorophyll food chain foundations in the ocean. The cosmic rays provide a similar amplification of particle radiation on this same life as well. Everything from cancer to cellular dysfunction to DNA mutations. Furthermore, the magnetic field of Earth usually funnels much of this particle radiation to the polar region, where virtually nobody lives and far less life exists. But in the excursion scenario, those polar cusps are found at lower latitudes, and an extra directing of that energy and radiation will hit the life-housing regions of the Earth, while at the same time, the field is also less able to block the pushing of Van Allen belt electrons downward into the atmosphere during solar storm impact. It's a double whammy for the latitudes where most of the life on Earth is found. So why do these scientists keep finding extinction and major biosphere stress related to the magnetic pole shifts? It's because of those climate impacts and both the extra ultraviolet and particle radiation. Taking extra radiation when your environment shifts dramatically is a serious challenge for most life. But it gets worse. It's not just birds that use the magnetic field for navigation, but many other creatures as well, including several marine species like dolphins, whales, sharks, turtles, and various fish. And it's not just for migration, but foraging and finding reproductive zones. Similar impacts are found for insects in terms of hibernation, egg success, and activity in the day versus night. And even plants use Earth's field. It's critical for germination, seed health, growth, and flowering. So let's make that climate chaos, extra radiation, and navigational struggles, not to mention the problems with the plants. This is why the scientists are able to so clearly see that these cyclical magnetic pole shifts are major problems for life on Earth. As humans deal with these challenges, both directly and indirectly through their impact on the food chain, we have also made ourselves largely dependent on electricity as a society. When the magnetic field gets weak enough, the sun is going to turn off the lights, destroy every power grid, and when that happens, there's no more heat, no more water treatment or distribution, no refrigeration or food transport, no gas, no ATMs, no phones or internet, no 911, no critical infrastructure at all. This is a growing issue, and it's on Earth's bingo card for the years ahead. In just the last year, things have taken an even more alarming turn. The March 2023 magnetic anomaly has accelerated this process even faster. We're on the way down much quicker now, which is what we're seeing with the accelerated downward curve in this chart. It is the reason why a minor solar event in April of 2023 caused an unprecedented and new kind of plasma penetration solar storm effect. It is the reason why 2023 broke the low latitude auroral record, and it is the reason why we got impossibly low latitude auroras this past weekend from solar activity that was significant, but it wasn't extreme. In the past, these kinds of aurora only happened with solar activity that was 20 to 50 times stronger than what we got. It happened this week because our planet is losing its protection. and becoming more vulnerable. The plasma shockwave struck Earth's magnetic field around lunchtime in the United States. It was very fast and moderate density shockwave with a powerful embedded magnetic field. The magnetic disruption to Earth came on much more quickly than anyone anticipated, and that includes me, who knows Earth's magnetic field is weakening. The geoelectric dynamics were furiously amplified in the Western world, and no, this mapping doesn't exist for anywhere else. But it was quite the pulse that we took as the geomagnetic storm reached level 4 just from this first impact, which was probably a combination of the first 2 eruptions, maybe 3. Magnetometer pulse was huge, similar to some of the biggest storms of the last 20 years, and we're just getting started.
We have to let everyone know. We have to call the NOAA.
They already know. The announcement will come anytime now.
It's going to be bad. Prior to that time, there's going to be chaos in the magnetosphere. And who's going to tell anybody about this? I doubt they can't tell anybody about this because you have folks that understand what that means.
Is there something that Mark Zuckerberg seems to know that we don't? Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, and that's of course a company that's owned by Meta, has started to prepare for a doomsday. The Facebook founder is creating a compound which features a doomsday bunker. He's creating this compound in Hawaii and not on mainland United States. The secret project, which the Meta chief is apparently hiding from the public, is called the Kola Ranch. The project which revealed that ranch is one of the most expensive personal construction projects in modern history. It seems like this ranch is not only a retreat, but more like a potential survival base for Mark Zuckerberg and his family in the wake of any catastrophic event. But why is he spending $100 million? He's putting his money on a certain idea that other people do not seem to be aware of. Now, Zuckerberg's not the only billionaire who's invested in some type of doomsday-proof property. There are several other billionaires and tech titans who also built bunkers or safe houses that might provide them with safety from any kind of a hypothetical scenarios where there is a potential or a possibility of the collapse of civilization.
We have solar winds that are constantly blowing on the earth without a CME, just the standard solar winds, without a magnetosphere, would set everything sunlight touches on fire. But you know how you've heard people say, well, you know, if the earth has a magnetic shift, it's no big deal, right? It's just no big deal. It's not a physical flip. You know, magnetic north will change, this, that, and the other, right? They lied. We're about to go through this process. The process has already started. It's beginning. There's an actual memo, right? There's a memo. There's a document set. Kind of like an emergency document set. There's a change in infrastructure. What do they call that? It's something like an emergency, but not quite that language. Because it's understood that the Earth is about to go through that process again, and prior to getting to the point of the actual flip, right? Because the magnetic shielding of the Earth will begin to weaken. It'll go chaotic. It'll start to weaken, right? When it totally weakens, it's going to do so for 10 days, then it will come back, right? The sun is not going to go out in these 10 days. That means with this magnetic flip, we don't have a magnetosphere during that time.
Enveloping our planet and protecting us from the fury of the sun is a giant bubble of magnetism called the magnetosphere. It deflects most of the solar material sweeping towards us from our star at 1 million miles per hour or more. Without the magnetosphere, the relentless action of these solar particles could strip the Earth of its protective layers, which shield us from the sun's ultraviolet radiation. It's clear that this magnetic bubble was key to helping Earth develop into a habitable planet. Compare Earth to Mars, a planet that lost its magnetosphere about 4.2 billion years ago. The solar wind is thought to have stripped away most of Mars's atmosphere, possibly after the red planet's magnetic field dissipated. This has left Mars as the stark, barren world we see today through the eyes of NASA orbiters and rovers. By contrast, Earth's magnetosphere seems to have kept our atmosphere protected. F. Tahia Zesta of the Geospace Physics Laboratory at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center notes, if there were no magnetic field, we might have a very different atmosphere left, without life as we know it.
Everything has to reorientate itself, and it takes about 10 days for that to happen, right? So we have no protection from the sun, none. It's not a maybe. That's not fear mongering. That's not anything. But I'm telling you, they know it's about to go chaotic. They know it's going chaotic, and even in the chaotic time, in these months that we're about to go through, because it can stay so long as it's chaotic. Various places are going to catch on fire. There'll be spontaneous fires. There'll be people with just hit with high doses of cancer. Right? It's not a very good time to go through. Right? We know that time is starting to begin. They know that time is starting to begin, and lots of contingencies will begin to go in place because of that. That leaves Earth vulnerable in many different ways. Many ways. I mean, beyond any other threat we've ever faced. So we don't need a solar flare. We don't need a CME. We don't need any of that. When it starts to go chaotic, the fires, thank God we have the oceans, but that's only going to protect us for a little while, because once that begins, we'll have a mass evaporation event of the oceans, right? That means fog everywhere. Of course, after that, it also means everybody across the entire globe will see auroras. And it won't make sense, because they'll say, well, we didn't have a flare, didn't do this, we didn't have this, we didn't have that. How are we seeing this? It's going to be everywhere. That process has already begun. And some of the letters, some of the memos that have just come out in the last 2 days, the language is quite alarming. This is not just talk. These are agency-level memos that went everywhere, and everybody has to read them. Anybody who gets them, they can't ignore them. Let's put it that way. This is a humanitarian problem, biblical scale, right? That's what it really is. And so, is it survivable? Yes, but it's going to be not good. Could you imagine forest fires? All these forest fires we've had. Can you imagine the entire Earth engulfed with forest fire? That would be bad. This is what we're facing. So we're in a time now where information is good to know. A lot of people will not have that information. And because we've never gone through that before, nobody knows the extent. So it's not going to end the world. That's not what it's going to do. But it's going to burn large portions. It's also time for people to they have to start looking at the realistic consequences of these things. Because a lot of people will live through it, probably yes, but it's not going to feel good.
This is where we hold them. This is where we fight. And these shields, boys!
The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.